Hello. And how are you this afternoon? How was your lunch? And whatever meal the rest of you around the world have just enjoyed. The subject for this entire program is one that's, I think, among the most important we could possibly be talking and thinking about. And by that I don't mean leadership alone. I really mean the subject of collective leadership. It is a difficult subject because it gets right to the heart of what I think are some of the deepest assumptions, embedded, taken for granted practices of our industrial age institutions. In fact, I think for most people the very phrase shared leadership or collective leadership is almost really an oxymoron. You know, it might be kind of nice to say, but we all know who leaders are, right? Right? We all know who leaders are. They're great men who do great things. Right? And those words kind of fit the image. And you think about how much of our time is spent in organizations trying to find the next great men to do the next great things. And how much of our energy and concerns are, do we have the right next set of great men to do the next set of great things? If you kind of probe these images for a while, you start to discover a few underlying assumptions. And it's these assumptions which I think should be the kind of heart of an inquiry which I would like to encourage us in this afternoon. There's a lot of lip service and a lot of talk in the business press, academic press, about radical change in organizations. And probably most of us experience that in a lot of different ways. This is a room of CEOs, so let me just ask you a question. How many of you think you have more or less control of your enterprise today than, let's say, your successors or your successors even 2 generations removed? Less control. Less control. Less control. And by the way, of course, when we say the word control, we're meaning it in a very particular way, aren't we? In a kind of a traditional way. The ability of a person or a small group of people to control what others are up to. Now, that's not a very polite way to put it, of course. But it is kind of the way most people have traditionally experienced it in our traditional hierarchical organizations. But in fact, the word control is actually a little more complicated word if you inquire into it. This system has control. And by this system, I mean this system right here, this physical organism system. But its mechanisms of control are actually quite distributed. Most advanced organisms have very complex networks of complex local control. If I cut my finger and it had to go through 13 committees to get to my brain for someone up here to make the decision to do something about it and then figure out what the right thing to do is and then translate that decision back down the chain, of course, I would have bled to death a long time ago. So in fact, evolution kind of moves beyond that fairly early on as organisms become more advanced. But it's actually not that control isn't important. Control is a necessary condition of a living organism. The real question is the nature of control, and how does the control occur? How many of you in your career have been part of decentralization efforts? Not just recently, but maybe in times past. A lot of us, right? How many of them have been fabulously successful? In other words, boy, that really worked. People really seized control. They became innovative. They were closer to the market. They did all kinds of wonderful stuff. They were coordinated effectively, et cetera, et cetera. Phew. How many found the decentralization efforts were less than satisfying? In fact, how many have lived through cycles of decentralization and re-centralization? A lot of times companies decentralize when times are good and you're growing and you're trying to respond to a whole plate full of opportunities. And then, of course, when times get tough, what often happens? In the China traditional cycle, when times get tough, oftentimes you can feel that power and control suck back into the center. I believe that the single most important leadership issue of our time is right at the heart of this kind of nexus of questions and concerns. And let me say it in one way, and I'll try to come back and forth around this in different ways throughout the entire time. What I'm thinking about when I say that is, I believe that at all levels, not just within our institutions, but at many other levels within our societies, we faced a host of very fundamental issues for which hierarchical leadership alone is clearly, obviously, by any measure, insufficient. We are not going to solve the environmental problems that exist in developed countries around the world through government regulations. We all know that. Nor are we going to solve the deep problems of economic and social inequity through better tax codes. We've been trying that for 100 years. Hasn't done much, has it? At least in this country. Nor will we solve the problems of safety and security in our urban centers through stronger police forces. Nor, I believe, will we learn what it takes to sustain deep and fundamental ongoing transformation in a business through the efforts of a CEO. These are profound leadership challenges that grow from a very different age. We're in an age today where virtually all the fundamental issues we face within our institutions and beyond within our larger societies are systemic in nature. There is no simple cause. There is no something to fix. There are profound imbalances. We all kind of feel them in our gut. The things we kind of deeply worry about, like how are we ever going to, whatever is the kind of thought that follows that for you. And I actually am not too optimistic that some great man is going to ride in on a white horse and fix this. So when I first saw the material for this symposium on shared leadership, I thought that's really right on the money. But it also led me to think of a lot of the problems that we've lived through for many, many years with organizations that have been part of where I spend my time. I spend my time in a collaborative arrangement of a group of primarily U.S.-based corporations. For example, HP, Lou Platt was here this morning as one of those. With the real intent of how to enable these organizations to work together, learn with and from one another about how do we go about sustaining deep and systemic change in our institutions. These are, by and large corporations. They are Fortune 100 companies, a good number of them. There's a few more medium-sized firms like Harley-Davidson, but most of them are, quite large. They're not the kind of leading edge of innovation. They're not the Netscapes of the world and the Nokia products of the world, who are in all kinds of ways a little bit different. But of course, the business world has always been full of new startup organizations that are very different, because they're small and one or two people have some very different ideas. They tend to grow into the same big, large, hierarchical, authoritarian organizations that we all know and love. So when we did this, when we started to put together this collaborative, we decided to focus on the large kind of mainstream enterprises, because clearly they presented the greatest challenges.